Okay, good morning. Beis, volume 3. We are on page 1227. We finished the paragraph on page 1227. Okay. So we're discussing here the 3 stages of development, of emotional development, I should say, of the Nefesh Elikis, the divine soul. After discussing it in general terms, in the general development and progress of human growth, you're now applying it to the divine experience. And the 3 stages are called Mutva, Murgish, and Muskal, or the words he used a little earlier, Ibur, Yenika, Moichin. Mutva being the hardwired natural inclinations, the natural emotions of the divine soul that are initially concealed. Murgish, they begin to emerge, just like a plant that begins to sprout from the seed that was embedded within the ground. And as we said, the way it's embedded, which is the natural emotions that express themselves in behavioral, in Aveda, it's the behavioral actions that a person does aligned to what God wants, but it doesn't have emotions involved yet. Or it has a little emotions, he called that as well, part of Mutva. And Murgish, and that becomes, and also it's Tmimus Shebelev, that sincerity, that loyalty, that inherent dedication and commitment that the soul has to godliness. That's the foundation, the seed from which will sprout the next level, Murgish, that we've been discussing. The Murgish is where it's already becoming revealed. You're seeing some emotional expression, but it's still natural emotions, not emotions that are generated and manufactured through hard work. It's the natural inclinations. The seed is there. It just hasn't sprouted yet. So you don't see its expression. So you're beginning to see the expression, as he said, that the midas that are embedded in him naturally are now becoming revealed. Okay. And that's what he called the level of Nar, Kinar Yisrael, still like a child, Nar Yisrael. As he said in the language of Kabbalah, Vav Ksav is the Yanika, the 6 dimensions of Yanika, his Galus Amidish Murgish. Now, he added, this always goes hand in hand, any type of growth goes hand in hand also with the mind. Because as we see, when a child matures, not just their emotions mature, their mind also is maturing. And as we discussed and learned at length, they go hand in hand. Because it's the mind that guides the emotions. Even on a very basic level, we spoke about the central nervous system is the mind that sends messages to the entire body, including to the emotions. But in addition to that, it's the mind's awareness and it's hakara, like he said, it's recognition of things that will spark an emotion that is embedded naturally. Just like when you see a nice piece of food, what happens? Your mind sees it, becomes aware, it tells you that, hey, this is something pleasurable, the memory and the whole process of the mind, and your emotion gets stimulated. Like we learned earlier, a person could be near something very special, but they might not even be aware of it. Or they could be near something dangerous and not be afraid because they're not aware that it's right in front of them. So the mind is part of the process. But here, the mind is still serving as a utility for the emotions. It's simply a way to get the emotions going, like he said. So you have some hisbanus. In Aveda, it's called hisbanus ki ata avinu, you are our father. Recognizing that God gives you life, chayecha. And as you contemplate on that the true life comes from your soul, not from your body. And that in turn comes from Hashem, from God. So that creates a type of attraction. Every person loves to be alive, loves their life source, so to speak. When I say love, it means not that you love yourself, that you are drawn to and connected with, and you appreciate your life. You in turn are appreciated by God who gives you that life. So that, that through this, there's an awakening of your natural love to your father, to the one who's giving you life. So though it's a hasog of his bananus, it's a comprehension and a contemplation, but it's only to awaken that which is naturally there already. Because naturally you love that chayis. A person loves them. It's just the mind is making you aware and think about and concentrate and appreciate the life force that's coming your way. But it's ein hasoga gedela bezeh. This is not a great comprehension as if someone's studying about God and godliness on God's terms. This is all appreciating the life that God is giving you. So it's not ein zeh shemasig eze inyan lekiu sheyurgish benafshe ateva ili delakus mitzad atzmi. It's not like you're appreciating and studying and appreciating God and therefore being attracted to God on God's terms. It's only the mizbonnus that the lekus is chayish shalai, chayecha, your life. And therefore, that's called katnus hasaga. It's hasaga, there is some awareness, but it's katnus. It's still in a very natural, you can say undeveloped stage. It's about awakening le'eder hatva levad, only to awaken that mutva, the natural instincts that a person has, the natural emotions that one has. That's what we learned, and that concludes the paragraph on page 1227. Now, he's going to continue, and this, I want to, before I read it on, I just want to just state this is, I think, important context. This should not be looked at in a mathematical way. Okay, that's mutva, now murgish, and we're going to go to muskal, seichel, midas, how they grow. You have to see it in a dynamic way. Look at, as I always say, look at yourself. As we've grown and we mature, or our children or our grandchildren do, and you observe them, you'll see, you can't really see change from day to day, but you see changes, especially early on. You know, so we notice the changes of our little babies from the moment they first recognize you or smile to you, or begin to recognize different things. We see this development. What the Rebbe Rashab is doing here in a fascinating way is dissecting it into stages and giving us language of what really is happening in that development. Is it the mind developing? Is it the emotions? Is it a combination, as we're learning here? So there's no question that every newborn has natural emotions that they genetically inherited from their parents, and it's part of embedded in their being, just like they have arms and legs and a color of eyes and a color of hair and other features. There's also a personality in there. But the personality is still in a state of katnus. It's in a very state of not developed. You don't see it yet. There's a point where you don't see anything, like in pregnancy or literally at a newborn. Doesn't mean you don't see physical movement. We see physical growth, but you don't see the emotions and definitely not the intellect. So though we can't map out every move, meaning every change that happens as this transition of maturity takes place, but there are definitely key criteria, which is what the Rebbe Rashab is talking about, the development of the mind and the emotions of a human being. Here he's talking about, obviously, the context of nefesh alekis. Before he spoke about it in general growth, as we said, biological and so on. Because as we're going to see now, even as we have in mutva, you see, he didn't just suffice and say it's natural, embedded, seated emotions, deeply seated emotions, seated as in both D, not S-E-A-T-E-D, but also seated as in S-E-E-D-E-D, like seeds, hashrasha. But he also said in Hatva, you already also have some form of emotion. It's minimal, but it's there. In Hargosha now, in Murgish, you see, he says there's feeling, and then in the feeling, there's also some seichel at work. If you recall earlier, when he spoke about from Perek Tezayin, he said it's not just behavioral. You could also have some appreciation with your mind and your emotions. Also from Tanya, that it's fitting, but it's not yet internalized. So you're going to see here a constant balance here. It's not just going to go from behavioral to emotional to intellectual. Everything is overlapping. There's emotional in the behavioral and the natural. There's intellectual and cognitive in the emotional. And there's going to be, so there's a constant mix of the two. The question is what's dominating and what's the main force. So what we learned till now, just this last paragraph, was the main thing is the natural emotions that are being expressed and revealed. The intellectual, the mind, is helping that grow. It's the awareness, like he said, of your life, awareness of what you should appreciate and what you should care about and love and avoid and so on. So now he's going to continue this discussion in that context, and we're going to see that in Murgish itself, there's two levels too. There's the Murgish that primarily is the natural emotions, and the Seichel is just guiding it. And then there's going to be, as he's going to say, Hamurgish Mitzad HaSeichel. So we'll learn it inside, but I just want you to be aware that we're going to be going through, even in the three, there's each stage, and we see that as well. With children, you see in the growth of a human being, sometimes you'll see more seichel, sometimes you see more emotions. It's not so black and white. The trajectory is generally moving from not just a raw emotions that we spoke about, raw, but emotions that become more refined, more guided, directed, where the mind continues to develop, the stages till 13, till we become the beginning of adulthood, and then the growth that develops from there. So it's all about this balance. We'll obviously sum it up clearly, but really it's coming down to the fact that emotions and the mind, how they interact with each other. And in each stage, you have a combination of several elements and the constant growth. So in Murgish itself, there are also stages. Like we said, the stage of Murgish goes all the way till 13. Moichin really begins at 13, even though you can't compare, let's say, a 5-year-old to a 10-year-old. So again, these are like general stages, but each one of them has plenty of levels within it as it grows. And of course, one child and one person is different than another. Some people mature quicker than others. In general, everybody's subject to the structure, but in the details, it can be different variations of it. Okay. If anybody wants to ask anything about this, it's fine, but I would suggest we read because he's continuing to discuss this topic. But just in case somebody has something on their mind, we could pause for a moment and listen if anybody wants to say anything. Okay. The new paragraph on page 1227. Omnom. Now, however, and if I understand it correctly, he's saying there's murgish mitzad the murgish and there's a murgish mitzad the seichel. So even though we just spoke about how seichel guides and makes you aware of your life force that's natural there, I believe he's moving now that there's also a murgish mitzad seichel. That is a deeper level of murgish, or a higher level, a more mature level. And he goes like this. We'll see. I'm going to read it and we'll see. I think that's where he's going right now, to another level in murgish itself. Cool. So the murgish that's due to seichel, meaning impacted by seichel, so till now we've been discussing that it's your natural emotion. You love life. You're attracted. You want to have life. You love your parent, your father. You love God because he gives you life. That's a natural feeling within your being. The only question is, are you conscious of it? Or you're aware? So the hasaga, the hisbonenus, is making you aware of something that you already have within you. Just making you aware of a love that you have. It doesn't have to, there's no chiddush going on here. It's not like creating a new feeling, a new emotion. Here he's saying that we're having a Chassidus idea sichlis through cognitive recognition. That with his mind, he recognizes the goodness of this thing. So before we conclude whether this is the same level, I believe it's another level, but I don't want to say anything conclusive, but we'll see in a moment as he goes on, because he's going to explain this in detail. The gam bezeh, and also on this level, where the mind is appreciating something that's good, and it causes a Chassidus of murgish, of feeling accordingly. Also this, yesh Kama chilukim medreges. Below they correct the word kamoi to the word kama. This too has a number of different levels in the neshama, in the soul. Ukamoi, he brings that pasuk again. Remember, we brought the pasuk Teichon on the page 1225. He said, "The Teichon libes Hashem." Teichen libes Hashem, that God establishes the hearts, and He said that Ein Lev, one heart is not similar to another. In other words, God establishes different emotional structures. I believe that same verse also says Teichen ruches Hashem. So here now we're using the ruches Hashem, the spirits. V'hainu b'chinas hamuskal shebemidus. So now we're talking about the level of muskal within midas. So till now, this was the third level. Mutva, murgish, muskal. All three in midas, in the development of midas.
Yeah, no such pasuk. Tegen ruch is no such pasuk.
So because it sounds very similar to the one that said Teichen libes Hashem. That is a pasuk, right?
Yeah.
Where's that pasuk? Teichen libes Hashem?
I don't know, maybe Mishlei, maybe.
Okay. So there's no pasuk Teichen ruches Hashem. Interesting.
No.
It's a similar lashon he uses.
It's the same thing.
Okay, but he uses the word ruches. Fine, I understand. So now he's calling this the muskal shebemidus. So let's see what he's going with this. I want to read with you together, and we'll see what he's explaining. Sheyes seichel eliki.
It is a Mishlei.
It's a Mishlei. And what's the full pasuk? Do you have the pasuk in front of you?
Haloi Teichen libes Hashem. Kol derech ish yosher be'enov v'teichen libes Hashem.
Oh, he repeats it twice?
No. Kol derech ish yosher be'enov v'teichen libes Hashem.
Oh, okay. That's the full pasuk, right?
Yeah.
Okay. Anyway, now he's introducing muskal shebemidus. So he says like this. And again, remember that the three levels are all in midas. If you recall, the beginning of the whole discussion began on the top of page 1221. Now, I always try to refer to the exact point of departure so we don't lose sight of the direction here. So he says, Yudua de b'midas is gimel madregas chabad chagas nehi, guf reish guf regel, and then he explained that that's the three levels. But if an elyon yesur mutva murgish and muskal, which is chabad chagas nehi, va'kol hu ba'midas. These are all in the midas. So now he's going to explain muskal shebemidas, and we'll go back to the beginning of the paragraph once we understand the context here. So he says, "Sheyes seichel eliki." We're talking, of course, the neshama likis. There's a seichel eliki, a divine intelligence. Shemispol mizeh dafke, she'ein zulosim mispol mizeh. In other words, when you're learning something about godliness, there's someone who will get excited by it, and another person won't get excited by that same idea. We don't all get excited and stimulated by similar ideas, like he said earlier about the hearts of people. So though we all have emotions, we all have ava, chesed, gvura, ava, yira, teferes, and so on, rachamim, but we get stimulated by different things. I just want to see the language he used there. One second. Yeah, there he talked about the 7 branches of emotions. Now he's talking about the seichel eliki, shemispol mizeh dafke, she'ein zulosim mispol b'zeh. So a person gets excited. Let's say they learn about Ein Sof Lifnei Tzimtzum. It stimulates, excites them. Someone else learns about Toyo and Tikkun. They get excited by that. So there's differences between people. And what distinguishes between one person's stimulation and another? That's according to the moichin of every neshama. Neshama moichin is also wired differently. People have different type of minds. we all have a mind, but the wiring of our mind, its type of so-called, its composition. Some people, for example, more chachma, some more bina, more das. But also within chachma, bina, das, people have different so-called temperaments, intellectual temperaments. Like we say, ein partzafein shenis, ein partzafein shavis, ein deyasein shavis. Just like our faces, people's faces are not similar, deyasein are not similar. And this doesn't just mean opinions. It means the way we think. Just like Shammai's mind was more gvuradik, Hillel's mind was more chesedik. So, but we're not talking now emotionals per se. We're talking about intellectual personality. So, according to the Meichen of Kol Neshama, va'agdola zu b'bchinas hamuskal shebemidus, and this growth in the level now, the third level of muskal within midas. We're not talking about murgish or mutva. Muskal, v'hu b'chinas hamurgish shemitzad haseichel. Like he said at the beginning of the paragraph, murgish mitzad haseichel. That is the feelings that are due to your seichel, not due to your emotions. Not the seichel is making you aware of your natural emotions. Your seichel is introducing you to something that the emotions were not aware of in the first place. Like, for example, we spoke about before. If the seichel is telling you, listen, God is hu chayecha, He's your life source, He sustains you, and therefore it stimulates what? The natural emotion that's there already. Like a child has love to a parent, and the mind is making you aware of it. But then the mind teaches you learn in Chassidus, let's say, the concept of Atzilus, or the concept of Ein Sof, or other ideas in the Lakus that you don't have a natural inclination to it yet. You're not even aware of it. So the Seichel is appreciating it, and in turn, stimulating the emotion. That's he's calling the B'chinas HaMurgish HaMetzad HaSeichel. So he says, this Hagdola, Zu B'chinas HaMuskal Shebemidus.
Correcting myself, there is a pasuk v'seichen ruchois Hashem also.
In the same section or a different place?
It's a different place. It's also in Mishlei, a different parak.
Okay, so we have to see what the difference between is.
Kol darke ish zach be'eino v'teichen ruchois Hashem.
Yeah.
As he said, u'moina levovis mi hatoiv u'mi hara.
Yeah. I think the difference is that when he said Teichen Libis Hashem, he was talking about the level of Mutva or Murgish. Now he's talking the level of Muskal, so it could be Ruches is talking already, it's like Nefesh and Ruach, Nefesh, Ruach, Neshama. So the first one is Lev, and here's Ruach is a little more higher level, where the moichin is more impacting the murgish, the feelings. That could be the distinction. But anyway, let's continue here. So he says, "V'agdola zu b'bchinas hamuskal shebemidus, v'hu b'chinas hamurgish shemitzad haseichel." We'll keep that in mind. What does he mean exactly by that? Does he mean the seichel, the muskal shebemurgish, or he means the muskal that affects the murgish? We'll see. V'hu b'yud gimel shana, and that emerges. This Agdola of Muskal Shebemidus is at 13 years old, she'oz mischayev b'mitzvos. When a person is obligated, and the chiyuv, he becomes obligated to do mitzvahs. I just want to see, on top of page 1225, he said, Agdola saseichel b'chinas hameichin hashayachim el hamidus, v'agdola zu mishtalemes ad yud gimel shom she'o b'chinas ish, shleimus hamidus. I'm reading on the top of 1225. That goes till 20 years old. Yeah, he's clearly talking. So who you be Yud Gimel Shana, when he becomes Sha'oz Mischayev b'mitzvahs, obligated to do mitzvahs, mepnei Sha'oz yesh bo hakaras sichlis b'tevara. Why is that the case? Because by age 13, he's developed and matured to a point where he has cognitive recognition of what's right and what's wrong, what's good and what's bad. He's going to explain what that means. And I'm going to go back. I'm not sure yet what every level is exactly, but we'll soon see. And even though a child before 12, before 13, also is aware, is also perceptive of the different tevera, of good and bad. We're not talking about a newborn. We're talking about before 13. You don't have to wait till 13 to recognize good from bad. That this is a good thing and this is a bad thing. And even then, he's also drawn to what's right, to what's good. Nevertheless, the difference between 13 and earlier, the child pre-bar mitzvah or bas mitzvah as well, doesn't have a true recognition, a true distinction, havchana, to distinguish between etzaminyan, what is fundamentally good and what is fundamentally ra. Shemashu teiv hudavar naila me'ed. He doesn't yet have that recognition, understanding that which is good is a very davar naila me'ed, is a very superior, very high quality level. And you need to make effort to acquire it and to protect it. He's going to give example. So we're going to have an example in a moment. And at that stage, he knows the basics of what's right and wrong. His parents tell him and he learns. You put your hand in fire is a bad thing, it's destructive. You eat a sweet, good candy, it's good. You know the difference between kosher and not kosher. But it's not yet a full appreciation, intellectual, full cognitive appreciation. He's going to give an example in a moment. And the same thing with Mashura. He doesn't have that hasoga, that it's rahu dover shafel upochas ma'id, that an evil thing, a destructive thing is a very lowly and inferior reality, entity. And you have to be careful from going there, from acting on that, from that impacting you. So you distinguish right now between the beginning of maturity at 13 to earlier, that both are aware of good and evil, but the real hasoga be'etzem mohus, what he calls mohus, the etzem minyan hatevera, is only later, after 13. And here's the example. And elsewhere it explains a moshel al zeh. Elsewhere there's an explanation with an example for this. Ashirus v'aniyus, Rachmana litzlan. We talk about wealth and poverty, God forbid. He uses Rachmana litzlan on poverty. Shegama koten yedeya. Also, a child knows that wealth is good, and poverty is not good. It's not a blessing. And nevertheless, though he's aware of the distinction, he doesn't yet appreciate and know and aware of the good in it, to the extent that due to that, that he will make an effort to acquire wealth, the wealth, and to protect money. He's not aware yet. In other words, would you entrust a child to watch over, let's say, $1 million? Even though the child knows the value of wealth, but they don't yet have that full appreciation of it to both pursue it and to protect it. Now, many ways that's also a mila. That's a separate point here. I just want to say as an aside, maybe it's good that children don't yet, they're not that consumed with wealth and money. But regardless, in the context of perception and appreciation, to say that a child doesn't have any awareness of what wealth is, no, you can't say that. But to the extent that you could say that he understands it, to the point that he pursues it and understands the need to pursue it and to protect it, no. And the same thing spiritually. even though a child knows in good and in evil, right and wrong, he doesn't yet have havchana. Is like havchana means when you say hamavchin, he's able to distinguish, to really clearly clarify and distinguish, and recognition in the quality of good. In other words, he basically knows it on a behavioral level, or on a very fundamental, on a very basic level. This is good, this is not good. But to say he really appreciates it in the full way that a mature mind would appreciate it, no. Yud Gimel Shana, when it comes 13 years old, and of course it means that period, Yesh by Havchana v'Hakara b'Mailas Hatev, he has the distinction and the recognition in what the quality of good, Mashu Tev be'enei Hashem, that which is good in the eyes of God. You could almost say that a child, if you don't teach him what is right, what is wrong, he may not come to it because he doesn't have the ability. An adult, or starting from 13, has the ability to read and study and come to appreciate the goodness because it's good, not just because he was told, or he just picks up the basic elements of it. It's a far deeper appreciation of Havchana v'Hakara. So both Mamashu Teiv, be'enei Hashem, in the eyes of God, u'shebezet tzarich li'ishtadl, and that he needs to make an effort to follow that path of goodness. Just like an example in the wealth. He knows that wealth has value, but doesn't appreciate it yet and aware of it to pursue it and protect it. In this case, to know what is really good in the eyes of God, and to make an effort, lishtadl, to make the effort and to acquire and to follow that path. V'ahipuch, and the opposite, liyizoyer medover hara be'enov, and to be careful. To be careful from things that are bad in the eyes of God. Okay, let's continue reading. It's a pretty long elaboration on this new level of what is coming to a higher level of recognition, which is not the level of murgish. Remember, murgish was feelings, natural feelings, and the mind is there to stimulate, to make you aware that God is giving you life, like he said, for instance. Here, we're talking about a deeper level of appreciation. But let's continue and we'll see where it goes. And then another hakara he has. So the first thing is he has a deeper and a recognition, a distinction and recognition in what is really right and good in the eyes of God and what is not. And not just on a basic, simple surface level. I mean, to drive the point home, I can just go even further. A child you can manipulate. Someone can convince the child, for example, yes, that wealth is valuable, but then, manipulate them because the child doesn't fundamentally fully understand what we're dealing with here. That's why you can't just have a child protecting monies because the child is not yet fully cognizant of what kind of value you're sitting on here. Whereas an adult, you can't manipulate that way because the adult appreciates. You can't just tell an adult, you know what, just let me into the house and let me just look around and I'm not going to touch the money, for example. Besides that, the adult is also more wary, but it's also an appreciation of what we're dealing with here. Well, of course, there's halachic implications of all of this because, for example, you can't make a cotton, a shliach, you can't make a cotton a true shomer, and there's other things. But even though we did learn that the pu'utes, he said, is mekcha mekach, meaning a child can say yes or no to a negotiation, to a transaction. But if remember, we also learned that a child cannot. What was the expression he used? Does
it mean a child can acquire but not relinquish?
Yeah, there was an expression. He said it before. I forgot where it was. It was on top of page. Oh, a child can, and yesh b'nichse avav. He can't negotiate and do a transaction. He can just say yes or no and agree or not agree. We said that, on top of page 1225. Okay. we're getting back to here. She says another thing that you have that it's that a so-called a more mature mind. We're talking about the Muskal sheba murgish, as he said, murgish mitzad haseichel. He says v'yesh lahakara be'in schar ve'enish. The Ben Yud Gimel, the person who turns 13, the adult, or the beginning of adulthood, has a recognition of reward and punishment. This, of course, is also explaining why a child is not mechuyev b'mitzvos and not responsible and accountable for their behavior. The parent is responsible. Schar v'einish doesn't happen until you're mechuyev b'mitzvos at 13. And the question is why? A 10-year-old doesn't understand. An 11-year-old doesn't understand. So he's explaining. He knows good and right and wrong. And now he's going to explain that he doesn't have a true recognition, whereas the adult does have avchana, or he calls akara, the inyan schar ve'enish. What is rewarded and what is not rewarded. In the parentheses he adds, Ahaveidahu inyan hakiruv shaydei mitzvah sesa. He's explaining what is schar ve'enish and aveda. Kiruv, through mitzvah sesa, by performing a mitzvah, it makes you closer to God. And that's in a sense, I'm assuming that's what he means by schar. So it's not just like schar mitzvah mitzvah. The idea that you do a mitzvah makes you closer to God. That's what it sounds like. The avedu inyan akiruv. V'aheper b'leisaseh. And the opposite, when a person, God forbid, breaks a leisaseh, it creates distance. So you have to distance yourself from something you're not supposed to do. So in other words, kiruv is closer, hepech is avoiding leisaseh. It sounds like he says that's the avoid of schar and einish. Schar meaning, but you get schar also from avoiding a leisaseh. It means basically a hein and lav. Like, in other words, the mitzvah sesa is the schar, is focus on the closeness. And the avoiding of something is to avoid being distant from God. So it sounds like he's saying.
Is the schar kiruv? Is the schar closeness and the opposite?
That's what it sounds like. The schar is closeness and the einish is distance. Okay, so all this is what's existing in a 13-year-old, ulechein. So firstly, he has, let's sum it up. He has avchana and hakara. He has a distinction and recognition in what is right and wrong on an etzem level. Etzem in Yanatev, he really appreciates what it is and what God really wants, what is good in God's eyes. And the second thing, he has a recognition in reward and punishment. Ulechein oz dafka mischayev b'kiyum mitzvos. That's why dafka then, when he reaches that age, he's responsible for b'kiyum mitzvah, for responsibility for performing mitzvahs. Okay. Now, all this is coming to explain how we're moving from natural emotions to the mind that's beginning to appreciate something more than what we're naturally inclined to. So though a child is inclined, has a natural connection to, in this case, the nefesh halikis in its state of katnus, even in its so-called undeveloped state, is connected to God, but you can't say it has that full appreciation of godliness. In other words, even though the Alter Rebbe, let's say, I'll take the highest example. The Alter Rebbe, when he was born, no doubt in his early years, before Bar Mitzvah, had a connection by his fundamental connection of his neshama. But can you say that the Alter Rebbe was the same Alter Rebbe when he wrote Tanya, and he said, "My Morich Chassidus," or when he said, "Mili b'shamayim imchalei chafatzti," I don't want your Gan Eden atachten, Gan Eden elam haba, only you atzmos. There's no question. It doesn't say anywhere that even the greatest neshama knows everything it's going to learn later in life. The Alter Rebbe had to learn Torah and had to become aware. And his mind was not the same mind as it was when he was 2 years old and when he was 20 years old, or 20 or 15 years old, or 12 years old. Because as he said right in the beginning of this last paragraph on the page 1226, remember he said, Shekain Sarach Liyaz Benefesh Alikis Kishalay Shalom is stated. This is the order of the divine soul, even when there's no concealment. The Mutva. God created that everyone has to go through the stages of development, just like a tree doesn't grow overnight. It first is planted, the seed, Mutva, then a sapling that emerges, and then it develops and develops till it becomes a great tree. The same thing, even the neshama lekis, not just the biological human being, even the divine soul, the way God made it is that it should go through stages. Mutva is the embedded natural. Murgish is already feelings guided by seichel that reveals. And then Muskal is now the stage of bar mitzvah where you're starting, the mind is beginning to appreciate things that are not just naturally wired in you. You're beginning to appreciate God for what God is, not just what God does for you. To use the language that he used before by chayecha, that it's your life. Now it's God on God's terms, like he said. So so far we've learned, just to keep the focus, that is they say this is coming through akaras sichlis. The mind is recognizing the value of it. It's not that the child already knows the value and the mind is just making you aware. But here the mind is beginning to appreciate godliness for what godliness is. And in this itself, there are different levels. Like we see one person is excited by one godly idea and another by another godly idea, according to their mind's structure. And this Havdalah rather, Muskal Shebemidis, Hamurgim Sadasechel, begins at 13 years old. And now he's been explaining why. At 13 years old, that my mind has reached a stage of maturity. Like if you go back to page 1225 on top, where he said, till 13 is the development of Shleimus Hamidus al Yedei HaSeichel, Ba'agdalos al Yedei HaSeichel. He calls that still Ibur. And from 13 and on begins the growth of Moichin, Muskal Agdalos HaMoichin Atzman, all the way till age 20, when he could be Limcher B'nichsei Ovav, when he can sell property of his father. In other words, be a fully run transactions and so on. So that's what we're now learning the equivalent of. So that's what we said so far.
Gdola also after that, right? Even after 20, you have a Gdola. It's not the same, 20, 40, and 60.
Right now, he's talking about these three stages. Yes, of course. Once you reach Moichin, the third level, even after 20, there's been Asim the Kayach, Ben Shleshim the Ben Esim the what's it? Ben Esim
Liradoif.
No Shleshim Esim
Shleshim the Kayach.
Shleshim the Kayach Arboim Labina. Of course, there's growth. Of course, we'll get to that. I don't want to go there right now. Right now, he's talking really the stages from pregnancy through childhood, through the beginning of adulthood. For sure, after that, it continues to grow. There's no question about it. But remember, just like there's growth, like the tree comes to a point where it won't grow taller, like a human being is not going to grow taller anymore. Obviously, the mind can grow, but I don't want to address that right now. Is that a new, because we do speak about three stages. Because the mind, the mature mind, stops developing at age 20. Even today, we know this as well in today in science, in neurology. Age 20, the brain is completely developed. Now, that doesn't mean learning more Torah and working hard and growing. That's not what we're discussing now. He's talking about the development. Okay. But so right now, so he's going to go now.
The Alter Rebbe is an exception. The Seichel was even when he was before Yud Gimel. That's my question. We see Rivka Imenu.
But it doesn't matter, but he's still different when he was 20 than when he was 10. There's no question about that. To say the Alter Rebbe could have written Tanya at age 10, you don't say that. Because there's Pasha, the Eibishter's Adam Yashar Helach. Just like the Alter Rebbe was, when he was a child, he was, let's say, 1 foot tall, and when he was adult, he was 6 foot tall. There's not a chsardin in saying that. That's the way God created human beings, including Tzadikim G'delin. You know?
It's in Yom Yom, and the Alter Rebbe was 9 or 12. He was teaching Kiddush Chodesh in the Ge'enim.
What are you saying? He said, Butzim Mekat fi Yediyah. I'm saying again and again, doesn't matter if he's a genius, but he's still a child, and not mechuyev b'mitzvahs till you're 13. That's halacha. Even Moshe Rabbeinu. So that means that there's still a child element there. It's not a chson. That's the way God created life. Okay. Since we stopped here for a moment, does anyone have any questions? Okay, now it continues like this. V'hinei. And now, chinuch b'mitzvahs, education in doing mitzvahs, hu kodim liyud gimel shana. That precedes 13 years. In other words, what we've been discussing now, the Muskal shebemidus, what he calls the Muskal shebemidus, amurgish shemetzad asech. That comes at age 13, that recognition, that havchana, that hakara, that and so on. That doesn't mean, as we said, that the child beforehand doesn't know right and wrong. So there is a mitzvah of chinuch b'mitzvahs, who kodim liyud gimel shana, is before a person is 13. V'shir chinuchu lefi havanose ulefi chrufuse v'diyase. Shir chinuch means the measure of how much you educate someone. So the education can be at many levels. So he said that is commensurate with the child's understanding and commensurate with the child's sharpness and awareness or cognizance or perception. Yediyah, knowledge, knowing, which is different than Havana. Havana is understanding. Yediyah is a certain type of like perception, awareness, knowing. Like it's written in Shulchan Aruch, Erechaim, the first section, Siman 343. Why he brings the source here, it's interesting. It's not very common in Ayin Beis, but he brings it. There may be something we have to look there. Maybe I'll look inside and see what it says there. But there he talks about the Eifan HaChinuch. So you see from this that even a child is also stage. There's also different children have different forms of education based on their level of, not all children are alike, basically. The Rebbe Rashab now adds, V'nira, he's clearly explaining that something in that Shulchan Aruch. The b'mitzvos leisa say, imrak mevin masha emnim ze asur. So we're talking now what you can expect from a child. Remember, a child's not responsible, but what can you expect from a child when you're educating them? Look, the fact is, we do expect something from the children. And maybe it doesn't have reward and punishment al pi Torah, but still a parent or an educator will expect and say, if a child is completely irresponsible, like a newborn, you wouldn't have an expectation. There wouldn't be the concept of reward and punishment. And I mean that in a very practical way, discipline, if the child didn't understand. So he's saying in the parentheses, a distinction between mitzvahs leisas and mitzvahs sesa. He says, when it comes to teaching a child what not to do, like, for example, not to turn on a light on Shabbos, or not to eat something that's not kosher, or that you don't know if it's kosher. Imrak mevin masha emrim ze asur. If the child understands what you're telling him, you know, as a child, and you can test that. You say to the child, you're not supposed to do this. Yeah, you're not supposed to eat treif. You're not supposed to do any work on Shabbos. Carry outside. You know, I'm just giving. Eat chametz on Pesach. You're not allowed to. It's a loisase. If he understands that, and you see he understands it, then it's forbidden for him. Mitzad chinuch, not minat Torah, because he's still a child, but that's osur. Ubemitzvah sesa, says the Rebbe Rashab, you need more than that. Not just that, you need him to know at least some of the quality of it. He doesn't have to know how bad it is. He just has to know it's not supposed to be done. It sounds like really, in other words, basic prohibition, a basic forbidden behavior. When it comes to mitzvah sesa, he says, I want to look in the Shulchan Aruch to see what the Rebbe Rashab is probably being a diuk in that Shulchan Aruch. But that's what he says in the parentheses. So mitzvah sesa, let's say the mitzvah of giving tzedakah, or the mitzvah of achnas sarchim, or the mitzvah of v'haftarecha kamoicha, to love another. So there, it's not just don't do it, period. He needs to have some recognition what he calls yedei ktsas malas hadavar. They should be somewhat aware of the quality of why it's important to say a kind word or to give tzedakah to a person who's in need. Now, why can't you say that the mitzvah sesa is also just behavioral, where you just tell the child, someone in need, just give them tzedakah? Why do they need to be yedei ktsas malas hadavar? I'm not sure. I want to look inside the Shulchan Aruch, but clearly the Rebbe is saying v'nira. Nira means apparently. No, it's like a chiddush that he's interpreting something in the Shulchan Aruch. So I'll get back to you on this on tomorrow. I want to look inside and see what exactly it says in Shulchan Aruch and what the Rebbe Rashab is coming to explain. But he feels the need to say there's a difference in when you educate a child in something that you're not supposed to do and that which you're supposed to do. If somebody has a thought on this, by all means. I wouldn't guess. I would look inside Shulchan Aruch, but maybe as someone has looked.
I think I mean, I didn't look, but I'm thinking he's saying this is where it starts. There's different levels on understanding an Isser. The beginning of an Isser is just knowing that it's Asr.
Why can't you say by mitzvah sesa the same thing? The beginning of a mitzvah sesa is to knowing that it's right, even if you don't understand. You could say the same thing by mitzvah sesa.
Well,
why is it distinguished?
It seems he's saying that's different there a little bit, but
that's why I'm asking. That's why I'm asking. Why? As I said, I think if you look inside, we'll probably be able to figure it out. Of course, that's what he's saying, that this is the minimum. Of course, there's more to know. The child understands also why this is dangerous. Remember, he said before with the child that he knows something is right and wrong. He knows it's destructive, but he may not understand why. Here, when it comes to positive, he clearly feels, the Rebbe Rashab, that there's a need for some recognition of something at least. Okay.
The only thing I added is that it's a starting point.
Yeah, I got it. Of course, that's correct. That's correct. Okay, I'll look inside. We'll be patient. I'll try to find something by tomorrow. Okay. Okay, so here we have the difference between educating a child and once they become responsible is very much based on the development of their mind and its relationship with emotions. When the child is primarily an emotional, impulsive creature, and the mind is there to guide it and express and reveal those natural emotions, so their chinuch is appropriate, and the child is being educated. When a child has reached 13, and he doesn't say it, but it's also clear that a girl at 12, they're expected now, they're actually responsible because their mind has begun to appreciate the good in a deeper way for what it really is good. Why is it good? Why is it not good? And understands also schar ve'enish, like he said, maybe that in I'm even thinking maybe these two parentheses are connected because in both of them he brought mitzvah sesa, mitzvah leisesa. Not sure. I don't see the connection, but I'm just seeing the similarity. Okay, so that's distinction between the stage before bar mitzvah and the stage after bar mitzvah. Ha'inyan hu. So now the inyan in this is going to explain what is going on here. In the growth and development and the maturation or the maturity of midas, of emotions. Remember, we've been talking about them, bagdolas hamidus. Like we're talking about them like Adam Eitz HaSoda, the human beings like the tree in the field, a growing entity. So we grow physically, and we also grow emotionally. And we're talking here about the growth from mutva, murgish, muskal. She says, now in the growth of midas, yesh b'zeh helam v'gili. In the general process of this growth, there's a state of concealment, there's a state of revelation, where it's revealed. Like we learned earlier about Helam and Gili. Okay. Hein ba murgish de midas, both in the murgish of midas, the state of murgish where you feel Even though we said mutva is the real concealed state, the seeds that are in the ground, but in the murgish midas, v'heim ba murgish mitzad haseichel, which is what he has introduced here. Not just the emotions, but the murgish mitzad haseichel, how the seichel is generating or guiding the emotions. So there's a state of helam and gili. Let's see what that means now. Ukamay begashmis, like we see physically. How to be a nika in the stage of nursing stage. Remember, we learned the Yemei Nika, which we consider to be age till age 2, the nursing stage where the child is being nursed. So he said, as we learned earlier, that when a child begins to feed and nurse and grow, and we said the pleasure that it has, so the midas begin, the emotions begin to become more apparent. Ksas. His galus midas ksas shehin nikodim. So we see some emotions. You can see the reactions of a child. You see emotional reactions and so on. Remember, Yanika here don't define purely the nursing, the physical nursing. It means that stage of growth where the child is no longer ibur, would be pregnancy. Yanika is the early stages of the nurturing and the nourishment of the child as it's developing. And that's Yanika, and then comes Moichin. So Yanika, he said, and remember, Yanika, we learned also the period after Yanika, which is still childhood, until 13, where you go into Moichin. Mutva murgish, the level of murgish. So he says, you see Yanika that you see ktsas midas is gals midas ktsas and nikodim. The gam niraboy eza kodas sichlius canal. And we could also see that it has some cognitive recognition. It recognizes its mother, it recognizes a bottle, it can smell, it recognizes smells. So in other words, it's not just pure impulsive reflexive behavior. There's also, you see cognitive recognition. Ktsas. Canal, like we learned earlier, rak, shezo adayin behelim. So even though there's something you're seeing, it's like thinking of, you see it's starting to sprout, but it's still in a concealed state. You can't call this full revelation. It's concealed. Va'achar. So in the footnote they say perhaps it should say va'achar. The truth is you could also say va'achar kach. Well, va'achar hayinika, because he did say that. Yeah, you have to say va'achar hayinika. You can't say va'achar kach. I thought you could say va'achar kach. After this first stage of Yanika, there's another stage of Yanika. No, I don't think so. You have to say va'achar hayinika, because he said that also. If you look on page 'cause I'm looking at the bottom of page 1224. We says comes to yeah, he says la'achar yanika. One minute, please. Okay. The achar hayanika, and after the stage of nursing, ozu is galus hamidus. Then the midas begin to become more revealed. The yesh behem ktsas seichel. They have now some seichel, not just the recognition that he just spoke about, but like we said earlier, they have ktsas seichel. The seichel is beginning to understand things. Ad ben heyu ben vov shemekchon mekach. Like we said earlier, till age 5 and 6, when you could say mekchon mekach, like he said at the bottom of page 1224, where there's a yes is a yes and a no is a no, in the context of a transaction, because they already recognize something. Like he says there, at that point, a child is developing the awareness and the maturity to know that this is the right thing and this is not the right thing. It's still in a child level. It's still murgish, but the midas are beginning to become more revealed. So you see here stages: complete concealment, the beginning of something that you can recognize, both in midas and seichel. Then after Unika, which means from age 3 and on, you start seeing what he says, Gili Murgish Hagdalus Hamidus, and also Ktsas Seichel, Mipnei Shu Bakoras HaSeichel. Because he already has recognition. You cannot say a child in the age of nursing age, like a 1-year-old child, a yes is a yes and a no is a no. A child doesn't have that capacity yet. By 5, 6 years old, you can say a child has that capacity. Because the seichel is working well enough to be able to say yes or no. When it's much younger, they don't have that. The seichel is only the minimal, like he explained. Recognition of things. Not a seichel that's really functioning as a seichel. So he says, this is not mutva now, this is level 2. Murgish shebemidus. The ima yesh zeu shamakish zetev. The ima yesh zeu shamakish zetev. Even though that he is recognizing that it's good, Makol Mokim Hamidus Ikran Hemitzad Hatva. Nevertheless, even with this child that's 6 years old, the midas are primarily due to their natural inclination, their natural wiring. He doesn't understand fully what makes it good. He just knows it's good. So there's a stage where we don't even know it's good or bad. Then there's a stage you know it's good and bad, but you don't know why, and you don't know the real quality of it. So that's the state of murgish. Then comes stage 3, the murgish that comes through seichel. It's still in a state of concealment when you're talking about the child. Because the child does not have that full recognition, cognitive recognition, ad lahakim mailas hatev, to the point that he should recognize the real quality of goodness, and because of that, he should be drawn to that thing. That already is stage 3. But now, in stage 2, it's still in a state of concealment. But being that the child has at least some hakaras haseichel, the recognition of the mind, not in like the seichel shebemurgish, but some seichel we have more than when he's much younger. That's why it applies to him the mitzvah of chinuch from the Rabbanim midivrei sofrim, which means that he's mechuyev midivrei sofrim in these things, not min haTorah. And then he says, "Aval kasher yedei mailas hatei v'giroyin hara." But then when he grows and he knows the quality of good and the inferiority or the flaw, the lack of evil, and because of this he pursues goodness and runs away from, escapes evil. I turned at page 1228. I'll just finish the paragraph. This is already the level of murgish shemitzad haseichel, not the seichel that works in the murgish, but the murgish now the seichel is becoming more dominant. Ozu mechuyev b'mitzvos min haTorah. Then he becomes mechuyev b'mitzvos, not medivrei sofrim because of chinuch, but medivrei min haTorah at age 13. V'hu b'yesei ben yud gimel shana, and that's when he turns 13 years old. Sha'oz nishlam b'agdola zu. That's when it completes the growth of what? Of the midas, like he said, in the state of muskal shebemidas, and b'chinas hamurgish shemitzad haseichel. Till the murgish mitzad haseichel is completed at the stage of bar mitzvah. And then in this itself, there are levels of katnus and gadlus, less developed and more developed, as we shall explain. As we said before, it doesn't stop. But a stage has ended when he becomes mechuyev b'mitzvahs, because now his mind is a force of its own. It's not just driven by his natural, reflexive, and impulsive natural emotions, which is murgish, and mutva, of course, is the actual natural emotions. So that explains why chinuch, the difference between the child before bar mitzvah and after, because it's about how concealed and how developed and how concealed are the stages of the emotional and the intellectual growth. So we conclude the paragraph on the top of page 1228. Okay. Any questions?
Where would you put between Hey and Vov Shonim until Yud Gimel? He said, Acha Iniko is Galus Hamidish is Ben Tzas Seichel Ben Hey Ben Vov.
So if you look, no, it's good. If you look on top of page 1225, he answers the question. He says, Hagdel Zeisi b'meshech hazman shemizgad la'seichel v'ayidei zeh mizgadlim hamidus. Basically, in murgish itself, you're growing from murgish that's like the minimum. The murgish, you feel something, like in Yunika, you feel something, but then starts the murgish, the midas begin to become more blown emotions. You start seeing a child's personality, and that just grows. From age 3 till age 6 seems to be still before mekach. So there's emotions that are apparent, but they're still, and they're more than the first level of murgish. And then after age 6, he says clearly, so what's happening, the moichin hashayich el hamidus is growing from age 6 to 13. And with more and more awareness. Like we said, seichel makes you aware. So the difference between a 6-year-old and a 12-year-old would be much more awareness, and therefore much more focus and guided emotions. And that's why you can expect from a 12-year-old more responsibility than a 6-year-old. But when is it really complete that he goes to the stage of mechuyev? That new level of maturation is at age 13. Now, of course, you'll say to me, 1 second, a person is 12 years old and 11 months. Is you see any difference between 13 years old and 1 month? Or what? Obviously not. But the Torah has to make some line. And that's when the development shifts from murgish to murgish al pi ha-seichel, like as he calls right now. Murgish mitzad ha-seichel. Remember, the difference being one is still about me. The emotions are still subjective. And therefore, that's the main power. By bar mitzvah, you can expect that a person should do something and discipline. That's why, for example, can you expect a 10-year-old to put on tefillin and not have any heschadas, etc.? You can't. It doesn't have the moichin yet for it. Or other things that the child is not yet fully cognizant or aware of. So I think in those stages itself, there's obviously many stages. As I said earlier, he's not breaking it down literally day by day or year by year. He's giving the main, I would say, the main coordinates, the main milestones as we move from Ibur, Yunika, Meichin, Mutva, Murgish, Muskal. But clearly, Murgish has many levels. That's very clear. Actually, Yunika is already Murgish. Then there's Acha Yunika, till age 6, 3 to 6. No, there's 0 to 2, there's 3 to 6, and then from 6 to 13. All Murgish. 0 to 2, he compared as, right, the birth he compared to Ibur. But basically, from more or less the first months of a child's life till 13 is all murgish. In murgish itself, it could be murgish sheba, mudva sheba murgish, murgish sheba murgish, seichel sheba murgish. But now he's talking. Then 13 starts what he calls murgish mitzad seichel, and that itself is going to have levels. There's going to be mudva sheba muskal, murgish sheba muskal, and mudva and muskal sheba muskal, as is understood. Okay. Yeah.
Thank you. 0 till 2 is Yaniko, no?
Yeah, but not Ibur. That's Murgish. Yanika is Murgish. It's just a very minimal level of Murgish. Correct. Okay. Any other question? Anybody has any question? Anybody wants any clarity about anything? No? Okay.
I posted it was Shin Mem Gimel, Halacha Gimel on the WhatsApp.
Okay, let's look. Oh, it's very clear. He clearly makes a distinction between mitzvah and mitzvah leisasa here. Question is, why is it Venira? Venira seems to be an explanation in this Sif Shulchan Aruch. Is this the Alter Rebbe Shulchan Aruch or Beis Yosef? Is this the Mechaber or the Alter Rebbe?
Alter Rebbe.
Well, there's clearly a distinction between mitzvah and mitzvah leisasa. It looks like, I want to read it more in depth. I'll read it later. Because he says, "L'chrifose v'diyase b'chol davar finyanov hayedemi in Shabbos chayav l'shmoi kedushin v'avdola." Av lachina b'leisase ben shel teira ben shel divreim u'b'chol tinik shu baravona shemevi shem lish is also lasis lechel avol tinik she'ena baravona klal ein of mitzvah. Yeah, the Rebbe Rashab seems to be adding words to explain the difference between mitzvah and mitzvah leisasa. Mitzvah requires some hakar that says clearly here, and mitzvah leisasa, all you need is a bar havana. Mitzvah needs more, so it's not that Alter Rebbe Rashab's Chiddush. It's a Shulchan Aruch, and he's adding the nida like mevim mashem is a asur. Mitzvah yudei k'tzas mailas hadover. He has the word mailas hadover. I don't think he says here he just bechol dover l'fi inyoni. He's adding it because it sounds like it's fitting to what he says here in this Maimer, that we're talking about already recognizing the quality of something, not just that it's do it or don't do it, without any recognition or appreciation, I would say. But I'm going to look at it again. I'll go over it tomorrow more in detail. But thanks for posting it. Yeah. Anybody else wants to add anything, or will some?
Is it the Alter Rebbe Hilchis Chinuch? Because I don't know if there is Hilchis Chinuch by the Alter Rebbe.
Shimon Gimel, he just said he took it from the Alter Rebbe.
The question is if it's the Alter Rebbe or the Beis Yosef, you said.
He said Alter Rebbe.
Beis Yosef, it's just.
Where is it saying it's the Alter Rebbe?
He told me. I just asked Rabbi Weingarten. He said it's the Alter Rebbe. He copied it from there.
Where do you see it, Rabbi Weingarten? Where do you see it in the Alter Rebbe? Welche halachas?
Simen Shimon Gimel. You have an Eire Chaim Simen Shimon Gimel?
I just copied it from the Chabad library.
I mean, this is a Milsa Avidah L'Glui. You can look it up. You're looking in Shulchan Aruch, Reb Shleima?
No, I looked in Shulchan Aruch Harav, but it doesn't give me the Simonim. It gives me only.
There's no Shulchan Aruch Alter Rebbe.
Rabbi Weingarten wrote it. He copied that. He put it on the WhatsApp.
From Alter Rebbe Shulchan Aruch. I asked him that question.
Yeah.
Okay, we'll stop here at the top of page 1228.